Vanessa Johnson sat in her small home office in Rockford, Illinois, staring at the email that had just arrived. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words again, hoping somehow they'd change on the second pass. Vanessa, I think it's best we pause our working relationship for now. I'll reach out if things change. The sender was Margaret Chen, the client who had kept Vanessa's freelance marketing consulting business afloat for the past 18 months. The client who paid on time, every time. The client who referred her to others. The client who made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could actually build something sustainable after leaving her corporate job at 43. Vanessa closed her laptop slowly, the click echoing in the quiet room. Outside, November rain drummed against the window, matching the rhythm of her sinking heart. She'd known this business would be hard. What she hadn't known was how a single decision made with the best intentions could unravel everything she'd built. But let me take you back to where this really started, because understanding how Vanessa lost her best client begins with understanding how she got there in the first place. Vanessa had spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized advertising firm in Chicago. She'd started as a junior copywriter fresh out of college, worked her way up to senior account manager, survived 3 company restructures, and earned the respect of colleagues who initially doubted whether a black woman from the South Side belonged in their polished conference rooms. She belonged. She excelled. She brought in major accounts, mentored younger staff, and built a reputation for turning struggling campaigns into success stories. But at 43, sitting in yet another meeting about synergistic optimization and dynamic vertical integration, Vanessa realized something fundamental. She was exhausted. Not the tired that comes from working hard, but the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from working hard on things that don't matter to you anymore. The turning point came during her annual review. Her boss, a man 15 years her junior who'd been promoted over her twice, leaned back in his chair and said, "Vanessa, you're doing great work, really solid, but I'm not seeing that hunger anymore, you know? That fire?" She wanted to tell him that the fire hadn't gone out. It had just found a different direction. That she'd spent the past year building a side consulting practice, helping small businesses with marketing strategies they could actually afford. That she'd discovered more satisfaction in helping Rosa Martinez expand her family bakery than in convincing people they needed another streaming service. Instead, she smiled professionally and said, "I understand." 2 months later, she handed in her resignation. Her colleagues thought she was crazy. Her mother said she was having a midlife crisis. Her best friend Keisha asked if she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But it was her mind to lose. The first year of freelancing taught Vanessa humility in ways her corporate career never had. The clients she'd imagined would flock to her independent practice didn't materialize. The network she'd built over 20 years suddenly seemed less interested when she wasn't attached to a prestigious firm. She took on projects that barely covered her bills. She learned to smile through consultations with clients who wanted just a few tweaks that required completely rewriting their entire strategy. She discovered that exposure and portfolio building opportunities didn't pay the mortgage. Her savings dwindled. Her confidence wavered. There were nights she lay awake wondering if everyone had been right, if she'd made a terrible mistake walking away from security for the uncertain promise of independence. But Vanessa had never been a quitter. She adjusted her approach, refined her services, and slowly, painfully slowly, built a client base. Small businesses, mostly. Entrepreneurs who appreciated her corporate experience, but needed someone who understood working with limited budgets. She became known for delivering results without the agency price tag. Then, in 14th month of her solo venture, she got the referral that changed everything. Margaret Chen ran Blueprint Marketing Solutions, a boutique agency serving tech startups and small software companies. She'd been referred to Vanessa by a mutual connection, and from their first phone call, Vanessa knew this was different. Margaret was professional, clear about her needs, and realistic about timelines. She needed someone to handle overflow work, specialized projects her in-house team didn't have bandwidth for, and strategic consulting for clients in industries her team didn't understand well. "I don't need someone to reinvent the wheel," Margaret had said during their initial meeting at a coffee shop in downtown Rockford. "I need someone who knows what they're doing, communicates clearly, and delivers on time. Based on what I've heard about you, that's exactly what you are." The first project was a test. Both women knew it. Vanessa poured everything into it, delivering a comprehensive marketing strategy for one of Margaret's clients, a medical device startup, 2 days ahead of schedule. The client loved it. Margaret sent payment within 24 hours. That first project led to a second, then a third. Within 6 months, Margaret's agency became Vanessa's anchor client, providing steady monthly revenue of $1,200 to $1,500. It wasn't enough to live lavishly, but it was enough to breathe, enough to plan, enough to believe. More than the money, though, was the relationship. Margaret treated Vanessa as a valued partner, not a disposable contractor. She invited Vanessa to strategy meetings, asked for her input on agency direction, and referred her to other business owners in her network. For the first time, since leaving corporate America, Vanessa felt like she'd found her footing. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something real. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October when Margaret called with the opportunity that would eventually destroy everything. "I have someone I want you to meet," Margaret said, her voice warm with enthusiasm. "Remember I mentioned my business partner from my previous venture, Diane Foster?" Vanessa did remember. Margaret had mentioned Diane several times, always in glowing terms. They'd built their first agency together 6 years ago, grown it successfully, then amicably parted ways when their visions for the company diverged. Margaret had started Blueprint Marketing Solutions. Diane had gone into real estate development. They'd remained close friends and occasional collaborators. "Diane's launching a new project," Margaret continued, "a mixed-use development in downtown Rockford, residential and commercial space. She needs someone to handle the marketing strategy, branding, the whole 9 yards. It's a big project, Vanessa. 6 months, potentially longer. I told her you'd be perfect for it." Vanessa's heart raced. A 6-month project, the kind of substantial work she'd been hoping for, the kind that could take her business to the next level. "That sounds amazing," Vanessa said carefully. "What's the scope exactly?" Margaret walked her through the basics. Diane's development company was investing in a historic building downtown, converting it into modern apartments with ground-floor retail space. She needed comprehensive marketing, everything from naming and branding to launch strategy and ongoing promotion. "The thing about Diane," Margaret added, and Vanessa could hear the affection in her voice, "is that she's brilliant but demanding. She has very specific visions for her projects, but we've worked together for years and I know how to navigate her style. You're professional, you're talented, and honestly, I think you two will work great together." There it was. The endorsement, the vote of confidence from a client Vanessa trusted and admired. "I'd love to meet with her," Vanessa said. "Perfect. I'll set it up. And Vanessa, this could be really good for you. Diane has deep pockets and a network full of people who need exactly what you offer." After they hung up, Vanessa sat in her office, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, uncomplicated optimism. This was it, the breakthrough project, the one that would prove she'd made the right choice leaving corporate security. She should have trusted her instincts more carefully. The first meeting with Diane Foster took place at an upscale restaurant in downtown Rockford. Diane was a striking woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Vanessa's monthly mortgage. She had the kind of confidence that filled a room, the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. "Margaret speaks very highly of you," Diane said after they'd ordered, her sharp eyes assessing Vanessa across the table. She says you're talented, reliable, and creative. Those are exactly the qualities I need." "I appreciate her confidence," Vanessa replied. "Tell me about your vision for the development." For the next 30 minutes, Diane painted a picture of transformed downtown Rockford. Luxury apartments that would attract young professionals, curated retail spaces that would bring foot traffic back to a neglected neighborhood, a project that would leave a legacy. It was compelling. Diane was compelling. But as the conversation shifted to specifics, Vanessa noticed something unsettling. When she asked about the project timeline, Diane waved her hand dismissively. "We'll figure that out as we go. I like to stay flexible." When Vanessa inquired about target demographics, Diane said, "I'll know it when I see it. I trust my gut more than data." When Vanessa tried to pin down the scope of work, Diane smiled and said, "I need someone who can just handle things without me having to micromanage every detail. That's why Margaret recommended it to you." Warning bells rang faintly in Vanessa's mind. She'd worked with enough difficult clients to recognize vague requirements and unrealistic expectations. But Diane was Margaret's close friend. They'd been business partners for years. Surely Margaret wouldn't refer her to someone who'd be a nightmare to work with. "I'm interested," Vanessa said carefully, "but I'd want to formalize the scope and timeline. Before we begin, that protects both of us and ensures we're aligned on expectations." Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though I should mention I'm not big on bureaucracy. I prefer to work with people who can be agile and responsive." There it was again, the dismissal of structure, the suggestion that wanting clear parameters somehow indicated inflexibility rather than professionalism. Vanessa pushed aside her concerns. This was Margaret's close friend, a 6-month project, an opportunity to significantly grow her business. "I'm sure we can find a balance that works for both of us," Vanessa said. They shook hands on the project. Vanessa left the restaurant feeling excited but slightly uneasy, like she'd just agreed to something she didn't fully understand. She should have listened to that feeling. The project started smoothly enough. Vanessa submitted a detailed proposal outlining the branding strategy, marketing plan, and timeline. Diane approved it, enthusiastically calling it exactly what I was hoping for. They had their kickoff meeting on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, everything had changed. "I've been thinking," Diane said during a call that was supposed to last 15 minutes but stretched to 90. "The branding direction we discussed doesn't feel quite right anymore. I want something more, I don't know, more sophisticated, more urban. Can you rework the concepts?" Vanessa kept her voice even. "Of course. Can you help me understand what specifically isn't working? That'll help me refine the direction." "I'll know it when I see it," Diane repeated, that phrase that was becoming her catchphrase. "Just try some different approaches. You're the expert, right?" That became the pattern. Vanessa would create something. Diane would request changes without providing specific feedback, and Vanessa would try again. Concepts that Diane loved on Tuesday she hated by Thursday. Direction she insisted on pursuing became completely wrong after Vanessa had invested hours developing them. The 15-minute daily check-ins Diane insisted on often stretched to an hour or more. She'd call at 8 in the evening, expecting immediate responses. She'd email on weekends, expressing disappointment when Vanessa didn't reply within an hour. "I thought you were a serious professional," Diane said during one particularly frustrating call. "Margaret made it sound like you were someone who really committed to projects." The invocation of Margaret's name stung. It was also strategic. Diane had quickly learned that mentioning Margaret was an effective way to push past Vanessa's professional boundaries. A month into the project, Vanessa found herself working 60-hour weeks, most of them on Diane's constantly evolving requirements. The scope had expanded far beyond the original proposal, but Diane resisted every attempt to formalize the changes or adjust the fee. "I thought we agreed to be flexible," Diane would say whenever Vanessa tried to discuss scope creep. I'm not paying extra for you to do the work properly. That's what I'm already paying you for. Vanessa's other clients began to suffer. She missed a deadline for the first time in her freelance career. She found herself cutting corners on projects, something she'd never done before, because Diane's demands consumed all her energy. And through it all, one thought kept circling her mind. This is Margaret's best friend, her business partner of 6 years. If I can't work with her, what does that say about me? 2 months into what was supposed to be a smooth 6-month engagement, Vanessa hit her breaking point. It was a Friday evening. She'd been working on revised branding concepts all week, incorporating Diane's latest round of vague feedback. Her eyes burned from staring at her computer screen. Her shoulders ached. She'd canceled dinner with Keisha, skipped her nephew's basketball game, and survived on coffee and takeout for 3 days straight. At 7:45 p.m., Diane called. "I hate everything," she said without preamble. "It's all wrong. I don't know what Margaret was thinking, recommending you for this." Something inside Vanessa cracked. "Diane," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I've submitted 12 rounds of concepts based on your feedback. Each time, you've requested changes without providing specific direction. I need you to tell me clearly what you want, or this isn't going to work." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Vanessa wondered if the call had dropped. Then Diane laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Wow," she said. "So this is what professionalism looks like? Getting defensive when a client expects quality work?" "I'm not being defensive," Vanessa replied, fighting to keep her composure. "I'm trying to ensure we're aligned so I can deliver what you need." "What I need," Diane said, her voice dropping to something cold and sharp, "is someone who can do their job without constant hand-holding. Margaret told me you were experienced. Was she wrong?" The unfairness of it hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She'd been bending over backward for 2 months, accommodating unreasonable demands, working ridiculous hours, all while Diane moved goalposts and blamed Vanessa for missing targets that had never been clearly defined. "I think," Vanessa said slowly, each word carefully measured, "that we might not be the right fit for this project." Another silence. "Are you quitting?" Diane asked, and Vanessa could hear the disbelief in her voice. People probably didn't quit on Diane Foster very often. "I'm suggesting that we might both be better served if you found someone whose working style aligns better with your needs," Vanessa said. "I'd be happy to transition everything I've developed to another contractor." "How professional," Diane said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just abandon the project in the middle. That's really going to look great for your reputation, isn't it?" Vanessa's hands shook, but her voice remained calm. "I'm not abandoning anything. I'm offering to ensure a smooth transition. I'll even provide a partial refund for work that wasn't completed to your satisfaction." She couldn't afford the partial refund, but she also couldn't afford to continue destroying herself for a client who would never be satisfied. "Fine," Diane snapped. "I'll let Margaret know what kind of professional she referred me to." The call ended. Vanessa sat in her office, her heart pounding, adrenaline making her hands shake. She'd just ended a major project. She'd just lost significant income. She'd just ensured that Diane would give her a terrible reference, but for the first time in 2 months she could breathe. That relief lasted exactly 3 days. Margaret's email arrived Monday morning. Unlike her usual warm, chatty messages, this one was brief and cold. "Vanessa, Diane told me what happened. I'm very disappointed. I thought I could trust you with this referral. I think it's best we pause our working relationship for now. I'll reach out if things change." Vanessa read it 3 times, each time hoping she'd misunderstood. She hadn't. She immediately called Margaret. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Margaret, it's Vanessa. I just got your email, and I'd really like to talk about what happened with Diane. Please call me back." Margaret didn't call back. Vanessa sent a carefully worded email explaining her side, detailing the scope creep, the moving targets, the unreasonable demands. She was professional, factual, careful not to attack Diane while defending her own decision. Margaret's response came 2 days later. "I understand you had concerns, but the way you handled it put me in a very difficult position with someone I've worked with for years. I'm sorry, but I need to step back from our working relationship." Just like that, 18 months of partnership evaporated. The client who'd been her anchor, her steady revenue, her proof that this business could work, was gone. And the worst part? Vanessa understood why. She'd made Margaret look bad. Margaret had vouched for her, had put her reputation on the line with a close friend and business partner, and Vanessa had, from Margaret's perspective, failed to deliver. It didn't matter that Diane's expectations were unrealistic. It didn't matter that the project scope had exploded beyond anything reasonable. It didn't matter that Vanessa had tried every professional avenue to make it work. What mattered was that Margaret had promised Diane a solution, and Vanessa had become a problem instead. The weeks following Margaret's departure were some of the darkest of Vanessa's freelance career. The immediate financial impact was severe. Margaret's monthly payments had represented nearly 40% of Vanessa's income. Losing that revenue meant Vanessa couldn't cover her basic expenses. She dipped into savings she'd been carefully rebuilding. She took on rushed projects from clients she'd normally screen more carefully. She worked 16-hour days trying to replace the lost income. But the financial damage, as painful as it was, wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the self-doubt that crept in during the quiet moments. Had she made the wrong call? Should she have stuck it out with Diane, no matter how unreasonable the demands became? Had she thrown away her best client relationship over her own pride? Keisha came over one evening and found Vanessa sitting in the dark, staring at her laptop. "Girl, what are you doing?" Keisha asked, flipping on the light. "Trying to figure out where I went wrong," Vanessa said. Keisha sat down across from her. "You didn't go wrong. You set a boundary with a nightmare client." "A nightmare client who was referred by my best client," Vanessa replied. "That's the part that matters. I made Margaret look bad in front of her friend." "Did you, though?" Keisha asked. "Or did Diane make herself look bad by being impossible to work with?" Vanessa shook her head. "It doesn't matter who was right. What matters is that I lost the most important client relationship I had." "So what are you going to do?" Keisha asked gently. Vanessa had been asking herself the same question for weeks. She'd considered reaching out to Margaret again, apologizing more profusely, offering to make amends somehow. She'd drafted a dozen emails she never sent. But deep down, she knew the truth. Margaret's decision to end their relationship wasn't just about the Diane situation. It was about trust. Margaret had taken a risk referring Vanessa, and when things went wrong, Margaret chose to protect her own relationship with Diane. That was Margaret's. Right. It was also a brutal lesson in the realities of business relationships. "I'm going to rebuild," Vanessa said finally, again. The months after losing Margaret forced Vanessa to confront some uncomfortable truths about her business and herself. First truth, she'd been too dependent on a single client. Margaret's steady income had felt like security, but it had actually been a vulnerability. She'd let one relationship become too important, and when it ended, her entire business model had nearly collapsed. Second truth, she'd ignored red flags because she was seduced by opportunity. From the first meeting, she'd known Diane would be difficult, but the size of the project and the prestige of the referral had clouded her judgment. Third truth, she'd prioritized other people's comfort over her own professional boundaries. She'd tolerated unreasonable demands and scope creep because she was afraid of looking difficult or unprofessional. In trying to avoid conflict, she'd created a situation that was ultimately untenable. These weren't easy realizations. They required Vanessa to look honestly at decisions she'd made and patterns she'd developed, some of them dating back to her corporate days. She'd always been the team player, the one who took on extra work, the one who made things work even when systems were broken. That willingness to go above and beyond had served her well in many ways, but it had also taught her to suppress her own needs and boundaries in service of others' expectations. That pattern had nearly destroyed her business. It was time to change it. Vanessa started by completely revising her clients' onboarding process. She developed detailed contracts that clearly outlined scope, deliverables, revision policies, and communication expectations. She created a requirement that all clients go through a discovery process before any work began, ensuring alignment on vision and working style. Most importantly, she developed a new policy. Any significant scope changes required a formal amendment to the contract and a corresponding adjustment to fees. No more, let's just figure it out as we go. No more, I thought we agreed to be flexible. The new systems meant some potential clients walked away. A few balked at the structure, calling it too rigid or unnecessary bureaucracy. Vanessa let them go without regret. She'd learned the hard way that clients who resisted reasonable structure were clients who would ultimately cause more pain than profit. She also diversified her client base aggressively. Instead of allowing any one client to represent more than 25% of her revenue, she actively sought smaller projects from multiple sources. It meant more relationship management and administrative overhead, but it also meant she'd never again be financially devastated by losing a single client. The rebuilding was slow. Some months she barely made expenses. There were still nights she lay awake worrying about whether she'd made the right choice, whether she should have just stuck it out with Diane, whether she was being too rigid now with her boundaries. But gradually, her business stabilized. She found clients who appreciated her structure and professionalism. She built relationships based on mutual respect rather than power imbalances. She slept better at night knowing she wasn't compromising her standards for anyone. 6 months after losing Margaret, Vanessa had rebuilt her income to slightly above where it had been. The business looked different. It was more diversified, more structured, more intentionally designed, but it was stronger. 14 months after their working relationship ended, Vanessa received an email from Margaret. It began simply, "Hi, Vanessa. I hope you're doing well." Vanessa's heart raced as she read the rest. Margaret explained that she'd been thinking about their situation, that time and distance had given her perspective. Diane's project had eventually been completed by another contractor, but not without significant drama and multiple relationship breakdowns. "I realize now," Margaret wrote, "that the situation with Diane wasn't your failure. She's always been challenging, and I think I convinced myself that your experience would somehow make it work. When it didn't, I blamed you instead of acknowledging that I'd referred you to an impossible situation. I'm not asking you to resume our working relationship. I understand if that bridge is burned, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for how I handled things. You deserved better from me." Vanessa sat with the email for a long time. Part of her wanted to reply immediately, to accept the apology, and see if they could find their way back to working together. Margaret had been a good client, and their partnership had been valuable for both of them. But another part of her, the part that had been built through months of painful rebuilding, hesitated. The truth was, Margaret's apology, while appreciated, didn't change the fundamental dynamic that had ended their relationship. When Margaret had to choose between Vanessa and Diane, she'd chosen Diane. That was her right. But it revealed something important about the nature of their partnership. It had been a business relationship, not a true partnership. When push came to shove, Margaret had protected her existing relationship rather than investigating what had actually happened. That was understandable, maybe even smart business, but it also meant that resuming their working relationship would mean accepting that same dynamic, that if another conflict arose, Vanessa would likely find herself on the outside again. Vanessa had built something different now. She'd created a business based on clear boundaries, transparent communication, and mutual respect. She'd learned to value her own professional judgment, even when it meant walking away from opportunities. She composed a response to Margaret. "Margaret, thank you for reaching out and for your honesty. I appreciate the apology more than you know. Our working relationship was valuable to me, and losing it was one of the hardest parts of this whole situation. I've thought a lot about what happened, and I've come to understand that we both made choices based on what we thought was right at the time. I don't harbor any anger or resentment. I'm genuinely glad to hear from you. That said, I've restructured my business significantly over the past year. I've built systems and boundaries that work for me, and I've learned to prioritize fit and alignment over opportunity size. If you're open to it, I'd love to meet for coffee and catch up. But I think we should take time to understand if there's still a working relationship that makes sense for both of us, rather than trying to jump back into what we had before." Margaret responded positively, and they met 2 weeks later at the same coffee shop where they'd had their first meeting nearly 3 years earlier. The conversation was honest and sometimes uncomfortable. They talked about what had happened with Diane, about Margaret's relationship with her former business partner, about the pressure Margaret had felt caught between two people she cared about professionally. "I should have called you before making any decisions," Margaret admitted. "I should have asked for your side of the story. Instead, I let Diane's version become the only version, and that wasn't fair to you." "I appreciate that," Vanessa said, "but I also understand the position you were in. Diane's been your friend and colleague for years. I was, at the end of the day, a contractor you'd worked with for 18 months. The relationship math made sense." Margaret winced. "It sounds cold when you put it that way." "It's not cold," Vanessa replied. "It's honest. And that honesty helps me understand how to build better business relationships going forward." They talked for over 2 hours. By the end, they'd agreed to try working together again on a trial basis. But this time, things will be different. Vanessa's new contracts and boundaries would apply. Communication expectations would be clear. And both women understood that their relationship, while valuable, was ultimately a business partnership that required ongoing maintenance and mutual respect. Now, sitting in her home office 2 years after that fateful referral from Margaret, Vanessa reflected on what the whole experience had taught her about business, relationships, and herself. For years, Vanessa had believed that referrals from good clients were automatically good opportunities. The Diane situation taught her otherwise. A referral is just an introduction. It still requires due diligence, clear expectations, and mutual fit. She'd learned to treat referred clients exactly the same as clients who found her through other channels. Same discovery process, same screening, same requirements. If anything, she was now slightly more cautious with referrals because they came with the added complexity of potentially affecting relationships with the referring client. Vanessa had spent too much of her career believing that professionalism meant accommodating unreasonable demands. She'd thought that setting boundaries would make her look difficult or inflexible. The Diane experience taught her that the opposite was true. Clients who respected her boundaries were clients worth having. Clients who pushed against reasonable structure and expectations were clients who would eventually become problems. Her new systems, while initially feeling rigid, had actually improved her client relationships. Clear expectations prevented misunderstandings. Defined scope prevented creep. Structured communication prevented the kind of boundary violations that had made working with Diane so miserable. Allowing Margaret to become 40% of her revenue had created a vulnerability that nearly destroyed Vanessa's business when that relationship ended. She'd learned the hard way that no client, no matter how good, should represent an outsized portion of income. Her new business model, with revenue spread across multiple clients and project types, was more stable. It required more administrative work, but it also meant that losing any single client, while painful, would no longer be catastrophic. Perhaps the most important lesson was learning to trust herself. Vanessa had ignored her instincts about Diane because she'd deferred to Margaret's judgment. She'd questioned her own perceptions because an experienced business owner had vouched for someone. But Vanessa's instincts had been right. The red flags she'd noticed in that first meeting had all proven accurate. Her assessment of the situation had been sound. Learning to trust her professional judgment, even when it meant disagreeing with clients or turning down opportunities, had been transformative. She no longer second-guessed herself into accepting situations that felt wrong. She'd learned that her experience and expertise had value, and that part of being a true professional was having the confidence to stand by her assessments. Not every business relationship is meant to be salvaged. Some endings, as painful as they are, create space for something better. Losing Margaret had hurt. It had been scary and financially devastating and emotionally draining, but it had also forced Vanessa to rebuild her business on a stronger foundation. It had taught her lessons she might never have learned otherwise. Would she have chosen that path if she'd known the cost? Probably not. But looking back, she could see how that difficult period had shaped her into a stronger, more confident business owner. Margaret's apology had been meaningful and appreciated, but Vanessa had learned not to confuse an apology with a solution. Someone acknowledging they handled something poorly didn't automatically mean the relationship should resume as it was before. When she and Margaret had reconnected, Vanessa had insisted on starting fresh rather than picking up where they'd left off. New expectations, new boundaries, new understanding of what their working relationship could and couldn't be. That approach had worked. Their renewed partnership was healthier than the original had been, precisely because it was built on hard-earned wisdom rather than initial enthusiasm. About 6 months after Vanessa and Margaret resumed working together, Vanessa received a LinkedIn message from someone named Patricia Williams. The message explained that Patricia was starting a consulting practice focused on helping small business owners professionalize their operations, and she'd heard through the local business network that Vanessa had experience navigating challenging client situations. "I'm actually looking for someone to lead a workshop on setting boundaries with clients," Patricia's message continued. "Would you be interested in discussing this?" Vanessa almost laughed. Her nightmarish experience with Diane and subsequent loss of Margaret had somehow become marketable expertise. She met with Patricia and learned that many small business owners and freelancers struggled with exactly the issues Vanessa had faced: difficulty setting, boundaries, fear of losing clients, uncertainty about how to handle scope creep, anxiety about turning down bad fit opportunities. "Would you consider developing a workshop on this?" Patricia asked. "Maybe even a longer course?" Vanessa hesitated. Talking publicly about her struggles with Diane, she felt vulnerable. Admitting she'd lost her best client because of how she handled a referral, it felt like broadcasting her failures. But as they talked more, Vanessa realized something. Her story wasn't about failure. It was about learning to build a sustainable business on her own terms. It was about the difference between accommodating clients and compromising yourself. It was about understanding that not every opportunity is worth taking, and that losing the wrong clients can be just as important as finding the right ones. She developed the workshop. Then she developed a 6-week course. Then she started doing one-on-one consulting with freelancers and small business owners who were struggling with similar challenges. The Diane situation, which had felt like the end of her business, had actually opened a door to something she'd never anticipated: teaching other professionals how to avoid the mistakes she'd made. 3 years after the Diane disaster, Vanessa stood in front of a room of 20 small business owners at a local business incubator. She was leading a workshop on building sustainable client relationships. As part of the workshop, she shared her story. Not the sanitized version where she emerged as the obvious hero, but the real story, complete with her mistakes, her fears, her near collapse, and her painful rebuilding. "I lost my best client," she told the group, "because I took a referral from her without doing my due diligence, because I ignored red flags, because I prioritized opportunity over fit, and because I didn't have systems in place to protect myself or my business." She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected understanding and recognition. "But here's what I learned. Losing that client, as painful as it was, taught me more about building a real business than any success I'd had before. It forced me to develop systems, to set boundaries, to trust my judgment, and to understand that my business had to be built on a foundation I controlled, not on the goodwill of a single client relationship. After the workshop, several attendees approached her with their own stories. A graphic designer who'd just ended a relationship with a demanding client and was terrified of the financial impact. A copywriter who was considering taking on a project that felt wrong but needed the income. A web developer who'd been referred to someone by his best client and was already seeing red flags. Vanessa listened to each of them, recognizing herself in their struggles. To the graphic designer, she said, "The short-term financial pain of ending a bad client relationship is almost always less than the long-term cost of maintaining it." To the copywriter, she said, "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in the beginning, it almost never gets better with time." To the web developer, she said, "Referrals from good clients are not automatically good fits. Do your due diligence exactly as you would with any other prospect." As she drove home that evening, Vanessa thought about how far she'd come from that night she'd sat in her office, reading Margaret's email, feeling like her world had ended. She'd rebuild her business stronger than before. She'd developed expertise she could teach others. She'd learned to value herself and her work enough to walk away from situations that weren't serving her. And perhaps most importantly, she'd learned that the worst professional moments can become the foundation for your best growth if you're willing to learn from them instead of just surviving them. Today, Vanessa's business looks completely different from what it was during the Margaret and Diane era. She still does marketing consulting for small businesses, but she's also developed a thriving side practice teaching other freelancers and consultants how to build sustainable practices. Her client roster is diverse, deliberately kept that way to ensure no single client represents more than 20% of her income. She has a waiting list, something she never imagined during those desperate months after losing Margaret. She occasionally sees updates about Diane's real estate projects on LinkedIn. The development Vanessa had briefly worked on did eventually get completed, though from what she heard through the business grapevine, Diane went through 3 different marketing contractors before finding one who could tolerate her working style. Margaret remains a client, though not Vanessa's biggest. Their relationship is professional and cordial, but it's no longer the anchor it once was. That's by design on Vanessa's part. She'd learned that anchor clients can become anchors around your neck if you're not careful. Sometimes potential clients push back against Vanessa's structured processes. "That seems like a lot of paperwork," they'll say, or "Can't we just figure it out as we go?" Vanessa smiles politely and thinks of Diane. "I found that clear expectations from the beginning create better outcomes for everyone," she tells them. "If my process doesn't work for you, I completely understand, and I'm happy to refer you to other contractors who might be a better fit." Some accept her terms. Some walk away. Vanessa has made peace with both outcomes. If Vanessa could go back and talk to herself on that day Margaret first mentioned Diane, what would she say? First, listen to your instincts. Those red flags you're noticing in the first meeting, they're real. They matter. Don't ignore them because you're excited about the opportunity. Second, understand that referrals from good clients come with hidden costs. If things go wrong, you're not just risking that one project, you're potentially risking the relationship with the person who referred to you. Make sure you're willing to pay that price before you accept the introduction. Third, don't make any clients so important that losing them would destroy your business. Diversify from day one, even if it means slower growth. Fourth, set boundaries early and enforce them consistently. Clients who respect your boundaries will become your best relationships. Clients who fight your boundaries will become your biggest headaches. Fifth, remember that you're building a business, not collecting clients who like you. Being liked is nice. Being respected is essential. Sixth, trust yourself. You have good judgment. You have experience. You have expertise. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, even if someone else is telling you otherwise. And finally, understand that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. You're about to lose something important, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to question everything. But on the other side of that pain is a strength and clarity you can't develop any other way. Trust the process, even when it feels like you're losing everything. So, here's what I want to ask you, because I know many of you watching this are navigating similar challenges in your own businesses. Have you ever lost a valuable client or opportunity because you set a boundary or walked away from a difficult situation? How did you handle it? What did you learn? Have you ever accepted a referral from a good client that turned into a nightmare? How did it affect your relationship with the person who referred to you? Have you ever ignored red flags because you needed the income or the opportunity? What happened? Share your experiences in the comments. Not just because I'm curious, though I genuinely am, but because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Maybe you're that web developer sitting with a referral from your best client, noticing red flags but afraid to turn it down. Maybe you're that consultant who's been accommodating scope creep because you don't want to lose a major account. Maybe you're that freelancer who just set a boundary with a difficult client and is terrified of the consequences. Your story, your experience, your lesson learned, it matters. It could give someone else the courage to make the hard right choice instead of the easy wrong one. And if you found value in Vanessa's story, if it resonated with your own experiences or gave you perspective on a situation you're facing, please subscribe to this channel. I share stories like this every week, real situations faced by real business owners, because we learn best from each other's experiences, both the successes and the struggles. Building a business, whether you're a freelancer, a consultant, or running a small company, is hard enough without feeling like you're alone in your challenges. You're not alone. These struggles are universal. The lessons are universal. And the community we build by sharing our experiences makes all of us stronger. So subscribe, share your story in the comments, and let's build something better together. Because here's the truth Vanessa learned, and the truth I hope you'll take from this story. The clients you lose while protecting your boundaries are not the clients you want to keep. The opportunities you walk away from because they don't align with your values are not opportunities you should have taken. And the short-term pain of standing on your ground is almost always less than the long-term cost of compromising yourself. Your business, your boundaries, your judgment, they matter. Trust them. Protect them. Build on them. That's how you create something sustainable. That's how you build something that lasts. Thank you for watching.